Hello, Elisa. I guess the best way to just introduce it would be to just say that we have one of my friends and somebody that I've kind of been working with. I guess, wow, it doesn't seem like it's been this long, but over the past year, that's how long it takes to get some of these things done with publishing and research and writing and everything like that. But Elisa is a friend of mine that I've been working with for about a year now, and we originally kind of came to know each other. I met you at Texas ACSM very briefly with our kind of mutual friend, my former mentor, Dr. Tinsley, who has a weird connection with like everybody right now. It's weird. It's kind of interesting to name drop him right now. And then I make like 3 new friends. So that's always kind of cool, including you. So it works out. But yeah, we met originally there. And then, I had asked Dr. Tinsley to kind of, work on a review with us, and he had recommended that I, reach out to you, or he reached out to you because he thought you'd be really, well suited to kind of give some really good input on that review. And that review is under review. And we've kind of just been working together since, and we've become, what I would say we're friends. Right.
Yeah, I can say that. Yeah.
Up to this point. And so that's how we know each other. But I think you're probably better at explaining who you are and what you do. So, Lisa, can you tell us kind of who you are and what you do?
Yes. Well, thank you for the introduction and for the invitation, Austin. I have a bachelor's in nutrition from Universidad Autónoma de Nuevo León in Mexico. And over the last 2 years of my degree, I started to do research, specifically basic research, working with animal models. And that's where I learned a lot of techniques from the lab, like real-time PCR, ELISAs, Western blots, all that stuff. And thanks to that, I was able to get a Fulbright scholarship to come to the United States and do a master's degree in Baylor. And so I did a master's degree in exercise physiology. That's actually where I met Grant Tinsley. He was doing his Ph.D. When I was doing my master's. And I worked in Baylor under the guidance of Dr. Darren Willoughby. And then for my Ph.D., I worked with Dr. Paul Gordon and Lee Greathouse from the nutrition department. And she's expert in gut microbiome. So that's how I got involved with gut microbiome research during my dissertation project. Then I went back home for a year and took an assistant professor position at the Medicine School of Tecnológico de Monterrey. Then I got offered a postdoctoral position here at the University of Texas, working with a very recognized researcher in the field, Dr. Sarah Messiah. And she works with obesity and bariatric surgery patients. And of course, I took the opportunity, and now I'm here in Dallas. So I've been moving all over. This is going to be the beginning of my 3rd year as a postdoc.
Awesome. So how long is your postdoc for? Is it?
The initial contract was 2 years, and then we got it extended over 2 years. So it can be, if I get to transition into an assistant professor before that, that'll be great. If not, I have 2 years more. So
for sure. Yeah, and it's kind of interesting to hear you go from working with Dr. Darren Willoughby, who's another one of those name drop people in kind of the kinesiology, exercise science realm, to going all the way where you are now under Dr. Messiah, and almost feels like, some crossover, but almost unrelated research, so to speak. So it's kind of this broad spectrum. I do want to ask, just because I'm just curious, how did you like going from the assistant professorship to the postdoc?
Oh boy.
Because ideally, it's the other way around, right? So I guess how did you come to do it that way?
Well, I wasn't as much time in the assistant professor position. It was just 1 year. So, I was still getting used to that. And I was still doing research as an assistant professor. It was pretty heavy in research. And right now I'm still teaching. So I haven't notice that much the difference in that
Right.
sense, because in both positions I was doing research and teaching. And salary wise, because this position was in Mexico, versus this position, so it would be pretty much the same salary wise. So I didn't notice that much the difference. But maybe here you will notice more the difference in salary probably.
Sure.
I don't know about work wise, I wouldn't be able to tell that, but yeah, I didn't notice that much the difference.
Yeah. No, I was wondering how much if you kind of got to have a little bit more free time to do the research, because and now that I'm kind of here at the assistant professor role, you have more of the teaching responsibilities. I've been thankful to be able to get a 2 and 2s, meaning just I teach 2 classes each semester. So I have 50% research, 50% teaching, but that's a lot more than you would have during your PhD. And so I went from having all this free time to be able to do research to like, oh my gosh, I have to try and really make this time and be very methodical in how I use my time so I can keep, being productive and things like that. So that's one benefit I think of having the postdoc, but it seems like you're still doing the teaching. So
yeah, I'm still doing a little bit of teaching, not much, but I'm still doing a little bit of teaching. And during my whole master's degree and PhD, Baylor is pretty heavy in teaching to get your assistantship.
Yeah.
So, I still had to teach 3-4 classes per semester.
Yeah, that's tough. It's really tough. So, I'm not teaching, I'm teaching 6 hours, but I'm teaching 3 1-credit hour courses. And so, although it's not the most difficult course, it still is it's more work. Yeah, yes. A lot of time commitment to do each class. And so it's kind of a way they work the system there. But either way, yeah, it definitely takes up a lot of your time. But I guess in general, just leading from there, and so you're doing a lot of the work with the gut microbiome. Would you say that's your primary area of focus right now, is working with that?
I would say when people ask me, I define that my main research interest is obesity. Mm-hmm. So from the moment I started, as an undergrad, throughout my master's, PhD, and postdoc, I have been changing, nutrition, exercise, and gut microbiome all over the place. But the common area is that I'm interested in weight loss and obesity, overweight treatment. So that's how all these areas relate.
And so where did you, or why obesity specifically?
Well, I don't know how aware you are from the stats from Mexico, but they are pretty much the same as the United States in regards to overweight and obesity. So around 74% of the population has overweight or obesity, and it's the same than here in the United States. So, we are dealing with that problem too. Yeah.
No, that's interesting to hear about it from Mexico. I was actually just writing a grant the other day, and I had to, report some of those statistics for Mississippi because it was a state level grant. Mississippi actually just became first in the United States for, highest prevalence of obesity. And so our overweight and obesity is almost 80% right now. And so, yeah, it's getting really bad. So obviously there's a lot of incentive to do that type of research. But in general, it interests me. And I also have a soft spot for it because there are a lot of different things that are going on within obesity, in my personal opinion, that make it really difficult to treat and manage. And so it's more of a kind of problem solving. It kind of piques my curiosity on how we can best do that. But I guess give me a broad description of some of the research that you've done and what you do in regard to obesity. So how do you take everything that you do and then frame it within that kind of obesity model?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah. So my main research interest as a scientist is to better understand the way how bariatric surgeries work, mm-hmm. in order so that I can develop a treatment for mm-hmm. weight loss independent of bariatric surgery.
Gotcha.
So right now, the best obesity treatment we have, the only effective obesity treatment in the long term, is bariatric surgeries. There's no other way around. Even the stats for regular population, and I'm not talking about people with obesity. So around 20% of the people who lose at least 10% of their weight are capable of maintaining that weight loss for a year, only 20%. And if you measure that weight loss at 3 or 5 years, there's almost nobody that gets to maintain the weight loss at 3 or 5 years. So these numbers are even worse when you're talking about people that have obesity. So I think there's a lot that we need to understand and that we can learn from bariatric surgery. So, you know, I didn't completely understand the world of bariatric surgeries after coming here. I thought that bariatric surgeries will act, you know, due to a decrease in the volume of food and creating malabsorption. And the truth is that malabsorption is not really a big component, and volume of food is only one component, but there are other components that are just as important, if not more important. So just, for example, the change in all the hormones after bariatric surgery. So there's, depending on which bariatric surgery you have, but if it's, for example, a bypass, you're going to have an increase in GLP-1, a decrease in ghrelin. So there's going to be an increased satiety for about 1 or 2 years, which is when people experience the highest amount of weight loss. There is a change in the amount and composition of biliary acids. There's a change in the gut microbiota. And that's exactly the area that I'm trying to investigate. So bariatric surgery is modifying the gut microbiota. And what has caught my attention is that if you perform a fecal transplant, which sounds pretty gross, but it's what it is. So if you perform a fecal transplant from a human with obesity into a germ-free mice, a germ-free mice is a mice that is free of bacteria inside and outside. It's just free of bacteria, right? So if you perform a fecal transplant from a patient with obesity, a human with obesity, into a germ-free mice, they gain weight more than the controls. And I mean, they develop the phenotype. And if you perform a fecal transplant from a patient who had a bariatric surgery into the germ-free mice, there's a significant difference versus, you know, those who receive samples from controls, normal BMI, versus those who receive the fecal samples from those with obesity. So there's something. I mean, this type of experimental studies show a cause-effect relationship with regards to how the gut microbiota can potentially modulate the body composition. We don't know exactly the mechanisms of action. There are some hypotheses as how this could be taking place. You know, one of them would be, for example, that the gut microbiota can help us to ferment food and therefore extract additional calories in this way. I mean, certain bacteria can allow us to do that. Now, there are other bacteria that are considered gram-negative, and they have a higher concentration of LPS, lipopolysaccharides, in their membrane, and that causes a lot of inflammation. And when you perform injections of lipopolysaccharides into mice, for example, they increase their body fat mass just by injecting lipopolysaccharides. And another form how the gut microbiota can potentially affect our body composition would be through changes in hormones, satiety hormones, like GLP-1, CCK, acetylcholine, and also through changes in neurotransmitters production, because we produce a lot of neurotransmitters in our gut. So it will change the production of dopamine, serotonin, noradrenaline, GABA. And so through the vagus nerve and the enteric nervous system in our circulation, there's going to be a communication between our gut and the brain, just telling us, hey, there's satiety here, there's no hunger, you know, and it can help to control even our psychological system. So these are the different proposed mechanisms of action, but we're still trying to understand what is that communication. So that's where I want to go. I have been applying for several government grants, which are, hard to get.
Yeah.
So hopefully I can get some money to continue pursuing these ideas. But yeah, so that is the main research goal. There are some projects that I have been working with in regards to bariatric surgery, and I can explain you those projects if you would like me to.
I'm still wrapping my head around all. There's so much useful information there. It's kind of mind blowing to me personally to just see all the different avenues in which we can, or like maybe said earlier, in that obesity is associated, or sorry, not avenues that obesity is associated with, but let's say all of the things that are going on or within somebody with obesity that aren't going on or manifested in somebody without obesity. And you see that, like you said, with your mice studies. And that's the mice study is really interesting to me, right? That obviously you would take somebody's, the fecal transplant into the mice, and you have some of these proposed mechanisms on why that the mice getting the fecal transplant from somebody with obesity would gain that excess weight. There's no way to really, or I guess, is there a way to go further with that outside of mice research? Because I would imagine that if you have that information about, this mouse gaining weight, taking the fecal transplant from the individual with obesity, you couldn't do that in humans, could you?
Yes.
Okay.
It has been done.
Okay, gotcha. I was going to say, I was thinking about I don't know how, or maybe I probably sometimes might overthink that because we can do some crazy things, but I was wondering what happens when you go from human to human? And I guess you had mentioned doing it after bariatric surgery, that the same effect doesn't happen, right? The mouse doesn't gain weight after they get the fecal transplant from bariatric surgery.
Yeah.
How long after bariatric surgery, I guess, does it take to have shifts or changes in the gut or in the gut microbiome?
It depends on the bariatric surgery because sleeve gastrectomy, for example.
Can you explain what those are?
Yes. So the two most common bariatric surgery types are sleeve gastrectomy and RYGV, or also Rogue's NY gastric bypass. So sleeve gastrectomy, basically what it is that they cut 70 to 80% of the stomach and they just remove it. Mm-hmm. And that is very helpful because the main organ producing ghrelin is the stomach. So once you remove 70 to 80%, ghrelin goes down, and people experience that satiety. But the RYGB, the reason why it produces more changes is because in addition to cutting like 70% of the stomach, they also do a rearrangement of the small intestine. So basically, they connect the stomach, the little pouch they leave, they connect it with the distal jejunum, and they basically bypass the I don't know if I'm pronouncing this one correctly, the duodenum.
Duodenum. There we go. I know that one.
I can't pronounce it.
It's okay.
And the proximal jejunum. And so we bypass all that area, but we still leave it there because we still want to enjoy the benefits of the pancreatic enzymes and the bile acids. So you still leave there everything else connected. You don't remove anything, but you're just rearrange the bypass of food. So basically from the stomach into the distal jejunum and then the rest. And this surgery is more invasive. It takes a little bit more time to recover. It's a little bit more expensive, but it produces more weight loss. And also it produces more effects in the gut microbiota that last longer. So I have seen studies of years after the bariatric surgery, and the patients still have a different gut microbiota. No, I'm not saying all the changes in the gut microbiota might be the cause of the weight loss. Maybe some changes are because their diet changed or because their biliary acids or pH in the stomach changed, but because of these experimental studies with mice, it makes us wonder if the same will happen in humans. We don't know that. Right. We don't know that yet. There's a case study in humans in which they perform a fecal transplant. It was more accidental than anything else, but they performed a fecal transplant from a patient who had a high BMI, but was healthy otherwise, into, I believe it was her mom. who had C. difficile infection, and the mom recovered from C. difficile infection, but started gaining weight, and she had never been overweight or had weight problems in her life.
Yeah.
So after that point, basically for fecal microbial transplant studies, they are now requesting to have a normal BMI to be a donor.
That's fascinating. I guess in general, I mean, still obviously we kind of said that the bariatric, and which is a huge area of research for you, you just happen to be, I guess, investigating it more from the microbiome perspective. Or just out of my curiosity, is that something that's generally covered by insurance? Or how does one come to actually get a bariatric surgery based on their condition, which obviously would be, obesity?
The bariatric surgery, yes, it is covered by insurance. You have to be usually working for your employer a certain amount of years to be able to qualify, and you have to show with evidence that you have tried to lose weight through nutrition and lifestyle interventions, and that hasn't been helpful. So you have to show basically, I think it's like 6 months of trying to lose weight through other interventions and proof with evidence that they didn't work. And then they usually authorize the money or part of the money for the bariatric surgery. And yeah, it's a very expensive procedure. A lot of patients save for years so that they can pay for the bariatric surgery. And I think it's a pretty good investment when you consider all the benefits it has health-wise.
Yeah, I'm definitely pro the bariatric surgery. I guess as I'm or just thinking about this out loud, thinking about it from that insurance perspective, or your access or ability to be able to get this. And you had said, obviously that you have to be able to show with some objective evidence, I would assume, or at least some documentation that you've tried other avenues. Is there any data or just your own, perception on how successful that 6 months actually is for most people if they were trying to get something like bariatric surgery? I would imagine if they're at the point of bariatric surgery, that they may have tried something previously up to that point, and it almost sounds to me like maybe we're just pushing it off a little bit longer, if that makes sense. So I guess I'm asking is, how successful are most people prior to bariatric surgery? And it seems like maybe that should be, or what do you think about that being more of a broad scale route to go to help with the obesity crisis, given that we're still increasing?
Look, I think it depends. And it depends on what. I think on the BMI of the person. So it's not the same to deal with a person that has a BMI of 35 versus 50.
Right.
Because we have patients like that. Mm-hmm. So if you're dealing with somebody that has a BMI of 35, that still qualifies for bariatric surgery because the person has diabetes, it will be easier for us to deal with a person at that BMI versus somebody that has a lot more weight to lose. Now, also it's important to consider, how are you doing these interventions? Is it just nutrition and diet, or you also include a medication? I'll give you an example. I work with clinicians from the UT Southwestern weight wellness clinic, and they not only provide exercise and nutrition interventions, but they also provide medication. And now we know that there's this very nice and effective FDA approved medication for weight loss, which is a GLP-1 agonist. And he produces a lot of weight loss, almost as much as some of the bariatric surgery procedures. So, if a person is a little bit afraid of bariatric surgeries, if they don't have the money, or if they are afraid of the bariatric surgery, even though they are quite safe, they could experience some weight loss when doing the lifestyle intervention in addition to the medication. It's just, you also need to consider, for example, the medication is not covered by all insurances, and it's probably medication that you have to take for a long time or the rest of your life to try to keep the weight off. It was just approved by the FDA for weight loss treatment a couple of months ago. So we still don't know for how long is it recommended to take and all that information. But, if you have a very well-rounded multidisciplinary team of psychologists, dietitians, biologists, MDs, treating you, maybe the chances of success will be higher. But I will say I totally agree with what you said, in that a lot of the people have already tried and many times to lose weight, and they regain the weight, and it's just trying to push a little bit further the surgery that they already want.
Right. Yeah. Sorry, we're getting a little bit off topic, but I think it's just I'm fascinated in it. So I'll probably ask you a few more things just to get your perspective that maybe you're unprepared for, that are kind of just in line with this. But the kind of the same question is, whenever I think about actually having the obesity crisis, and we know that things like bariatric surgery are the only ones that have been successful up to, what is it, Summerellin? Is that the medication? I may be pronouncing it wrong. The GLP-1 receptor agonist.
Semaglutide.
There's semaglutide. I could not remember what it was. Yes, said something way out there, maybe. But yes, that.
Or maybe you're the one pronouncing it correctly, but that's not anyway. I don't know. You're correct. I couldn't remember what the medication was off the top of my head, but those seem to be the only long-term solutions, maybe besides the medication, because we need to figure out long-term what it can do. But I think about the obesity crisis in and of itself, and you'd probably agree that it affects individuals at like the low SES level to a greater degree. I think the data is relatively clear about that, although it's affecting everybody. Or along with that is what the access to some of these things. So if we're talking about bariatric surgery, you have individuals that probably don't see a doctor regularly. It may be lucky if you get to see see a doctor within a year, right? And so they probably get there by the time that it's a little bit too late, and that could be due to just access to the doctor themselves to be able to identify the issues, or they may wait until they've already developed metabolic syndrome, right, before they even get to the doctor. And so then that leads me back into, once they get to the doctor, they may benefit from something like bariatric surgery, but then they're told that they have to go back for 6 months and show that they can try and lose weight by themselves. Then they go back into that same environment, right, that they were unsuccessful in, without very much support, I guess, or access to some of the things that they would need to do. And so it seems like we have kind of this great thing. It's just that we're not able to, get it to the people that may be in the most need. And that brings me to what happens with children. So children are obviously, suffering from obesity. We see that a bunch here in Mississippi, where we actually have, I think, in the top 3 highest childhood obesity in America right now. And so it seems that by the time you would even qualify for something like bariatric surgery, you're already relatively obese, or you've been dealing with something like this since childhood, so to speak. And it is actually, now that you mentioned, one of the areas that my mentor, Dr. Sarmasai, and myself are trying to push, and that is bariatric surgeries in adolescents, because there's not a lot of research out there in the area, and we believe that it is needed. I mean, we need that at an earlier age before all the other complications start happening. And obviously, the best treatment is to prevent the development of obesity, because we don't have, a quite effective, easy treatment. And so, but yeah, I totally agree with you.
Yeah. So then especially for children, so what is life like after bariatric surgery, as far as changes in habits, and I guess just broad changes in your lifestyle?
Well, I haven't seen in children yet. I was seeing in adolescents. It's a little bit further away, but they just have to be extremely careful with micronutrients intake. So supplementing with vitamins, because after you do a bariatric surgery, especially if it's a bypass, you tend to have malabsorption of several vitamins. So it's important to have regular blood analysis just to make sure that all the vitamins, minerals are in place, especially for kids that are in rapid growth. And also make sure you are consuming enough protein. And this is general for adolescents and adults that underwent bariatric surgery, just to make sure that while you are having this drastic weight loss, you try to preserve as much muscle as possible. And that is another area that has not received a lot of attention. And that's precisely, coming from the exercise physiology world. When I first came here, I was like, there's no exercise guidelines for people that undergo bariatric surgery.
Yeah.
Why there aren't? I mean, there are guidelines for people that have obesity, but not for people that undergo bariatric surgery. And those are two different things, because people that have obesity are consuming at minimum 1,200 to 1,500 kilocalories diet. And people that undergo bariatric surgeries are consuming 500, 700 calories per day. So it's a much catabolic scenario. And so what I did is I did a systematic review, analyzing all the exercise protocols involving some sort of weight training, because I wanted to see, all the doctors recommend do exercise, but they don't specify what exercises. They just tell you start walking and that's it. And so I wanted to see what is the science saying with regards to weight training. And to my surprise, I only found 9 scientific articles that utilize some sort of weight training, and only 3 of them utilize only weight training. The other 6 were combining with cardio. And so, after doing the analysis and everything, I was able to notice that weight training was able to prevent the loss in strength, but not completely reverse the loss in muscle mass.
Yeah.
It decreased it, but it didn't completely revert it or prevent it. And also it didn't completely prevent the loss in mineral bone density, because when you go bariatric surgery, you not only lose fat, you lose a lot of muscle and mineral bone density and strength. And so, that one of the conclusions of that systematic review published in, I think it was Obesity Reviews, it was just, we need to create weight training interventions that have higher volume, that are progressive, have progressive overload, higher intensity, because the highest intensity managed there was like, no intensity, the highest volume was like 60 minutes, 3 days per week. So that is not enough. I mean, you can start there, but you want to progress into 4, 5, maybe 6 days. And maybe reduce the cardio, because you are already in a very catabolic scenario. The only thing you're trying to do is preserve muscle mass so that you can retain your weight in the long term. So anyway, that was one of the publications that I did as soon as I got here.
And so, what about protein intake? What does that look like after bariatric surgery? And then how does that go along with preserving muscle mass?
So in the last couple of years, we have realized the importance of consuming protein, and now patients are now being recommended to supplement with protein. So consume some sort of like whey protein or casein or something like that, so that they can increase their protein intake. It is not enough yet. A lot of the patients do not consume enough protein, and is lower than the RDA for protein, which we already know is low. So, I think the more attention you put after bariatric surgery, and this is something I also mentioned in the resistance training paper that I was talking about, the more attention you put in the weight training and the protein consumption after bariatric surgery, the more muscle retention you're going to have afterwards. And hopefully the less weight regain you're going to experience at 1 or 2 years post-bariatric surgery, which is a time when a lot of people start experiencing weight regain.
Yeah. And so, whenever we talk about the weight regain rates, we know that those are terrible after most weight loss, but it's more successful after bariatric surgery. What's the difference in magnitude of weight regain between somebody who just did a regular weight or a diet and exercise intervention versus bariatric surgery, let's say 2-3 years post?
Yeah. So the stats I remember from scientific studies is like 20% of the people who do diet or lifestyle interventions can keep 10% of the weight loss for 1 year, which is what I was telling you. In bariatric surgeries, if you do AirYGB, 93% of the population can keep 10% of the weight loss at 12 years. No 1 year, 12 years.
Yeah.
20% of the weight loss can be achieved by 70% of the population at 12 years. 30% of the weight loss can be achieved by 40% of the population at 12 years. So, the numbers are ridiculously different.
Yes. No, that's super, it's super interesting, obviously, to be able to see that. and you had said something earlier, and I was going to ask you about this. So the hormonal changes, let's say specifically things like appetite hormones, right after you get bariatric surgery, you would have increases or satiety hormones and then decreased hunger hormones. Or when did those start to change? Is that another thing, or do those start to kind of go back to normal after 2-3 years? Or do those pretty much stay the same?
Yeah, that's a pretty good question. And unfortunately, they don't stay the same. I mean, they only last for about a year and a half, which is when people start regaining weight.
Right.
So that moment is when now the doctors, so I was in the World Obesity Federation 2-3 years back, and basically European doctors are recommending to start now at that point GLP-1 agonist. So you can try to keep a little bit or prolong a little bit the hormonal effect that bariatric surgery has, because it's not long term. I mean, it's only like a year and a half, the benefits you have at the hormonal level. And then those changes start going back to normal. And that's when you want to probably start a medication so that you can continue keeping the weight off.
Right. And that kind of brings me back to another point, maybe the difference between bariatric surgery and then what you would get with, normal weight loss interventions. Whenever you have, individuals with obesity, I guess generally you would have, obviously appetite hormones would be functioning, even though there may be some resistance to certain appetite hormones, depending on, degree of obesity, or they may be dysfunctional or something, let's say, depends on the hormone we're discussing. But there's generally, I guess, appetite hormones correlate well with your actual food intake, right? Or your subjective or perceptions of appetite. But sometimes you have perceptions of appetite that can kind of override whatever is going on at the hormonal level. Is that something that you kind of, or do you agree with that? Or, do you agree with that? And how about that? Let's start with, do you agree with it? That you can kind of override those signals?
Yes, you can. And what we have observed here, and the reason why diets are not as effective, and it hurts to say this, because I'm a dietitian. I wish I could say something different. But the reason why they are not as effective is because when you start a diet, ghrelin goes up, GLP goes down, CCK, PYY. I mean, it's all the hormonal changes are against you. And so you have an increased hunger. Now, if in people with obesity, leptin is still up because you're resistant to leptin. But when you have bariatric surgery, the ghrelin goes down. And if you have AirYGV, GLP goes up. So, those hormonal changes are one of the big differences between a lifestyle and the surgery.
Right. So then I guess back, so people are individuals with obesity, let's say that they would have those hormonal changes, or just any sort of hormonal response to a meal or to, fasting or things like that. Even if they were to eat, right, they can still and those hormones would fluctuate to, let's say, improve satiety and decrease hunger. They still have the capacity to, I guess, that the executive function to continue eating, even though, right, their hormones are saying that they're full or not hungry, right? Meaning or if I wanted to continue to eat, right, even though I had differences in hormones, I could. Does that make sense?
I'm not sure I'm understanding the question.
How about, okay, sorry. So let's say I had decreased ghrelin, right? And I had increased GLP-1 after I ate a meal, right? Or your executive function, or just your ability to make those decisions, right? You can still continue to eat for, let's say, something like reward, right?
Yeah.
Even though that happens, is that different, or is the ability to kind of override those hormone or whatever those hormones are signaling different, or would they be different in individuals with bariatric surgery, let's say, because you can't continue to eat more?
Probably because you get sick and people start, throwing up and stuff.
Right.
So maybe the fear of developing those symptoms more than anything else That doesn't mean that there's people that don't do it. And, that's one of the reasons why they are bariatric surgery revisions, because, people don't follow the instructions on the amount of food that they are supposed to eat. And that's also why the stomach continues to grow back, because, people are consuming more of the food that they were supposed to eat. But I will say, I haven't investigated precisely that, whether or not they continue to like override these hunger satiety signals. I haven't put that much attention on that, but I want to say that doesn't change much because of what I know at the clinical level.
Sure. Yeah, I guess it was kind of an abstract question. I was kind of thinking about just if even though I had, eaten a very big meal, let's say that's in my current state, if I was presented with more food after my satiety hormones were already elevated, my hunger hormones were suppressed, then I could, if the meal looked good enough, or if I had seen that food cue, it smelled good, right? All those sensory or all that sensory information had hit me in that way. You could still continue to eat, I guess, until you had some of those mechanistic changes in satiety, right? Like the bloated, extended or gut distension and things like that. So I was thinking about it that way from a bariatric surgery, like, I ate a meal and I was presented with more food, I'd already have some mechanistic changes or stronger mechanistic satiety with bariatric surgery. And so maybe I wouldn't be as apt to eat that next meal or try and overeat right after I'd already had that go on. But like I said, an abstract question. I was thinking out loud mostly. I do that pretty often. You have to forgive me there.
No, it's totally fine. I don't know, to be honest. I guess depending on that question precisely, whether or not the person will have success or not afterwards.
Yeah.
There's a pretty clear cut. I mean, there's people that experience more than 50% weight loss. There's people that experience less than 50%, and there's people that regain the weight.
Right. Oh yeah, for sure. So yeah, like I said, I'm definitely not arguing that one for sure. I guess I was thinking about it from the appetite side specifically. Granted, somebody who is not well versed in bariatric surgery. So I will definitely appeal to you there. But I think I definitely want to kind of continue on with the, gut or microbiota stuff, because I think that's, obviously everything is really interesting from the, a complex web of obesity that we have. That one is so mysterious to me. And I think it's mysterious to almost everybody, because I guess, we are understanding that there's, bacteria that exist within the gut. I think most people would probably say that that's, at least know that. But after knowing that we have bacteria in the gut, there's really not much more information that anybody really knows. And so, that if you think that you have some of those issues, you would take probiotics, and then that's going to help alleviate the problem. I think there's just a lot of, I wouldn't say misinformation, but just misunderstanding about that entire system that I think that you're obviously well suited to be able to explain. So I guess, could you explain just probiotics, what those are, and then what gut microbiota are? You actually posted something about that on your Instagram the other day, and I was like, that's a very important distinction that I would like to make.
Well, where do I start? I will start with the gut bacteria, the gut microbiota. So the gut microbiota is basically all the microorganisms that we have in our gastrointestinal system. And by that, I mean bacteria, viruses, archaea, all together, not only bacteria. We mainly focus on bacteria, but we also have viruses that have functions and archaea at lower concentrations. Now, when you analyze the number of bacteria we have in our in the human body, it is about the same magnitude of the number of human cells we have. So it's like 10 to the 3.8 by 10 to the 13. That's the number of bacteria we have, which is pretty similar to the amount of human cells we have. But we don't notice it because they are smaller in mass. So the gut bacteria has a lot of functions, such as, for example, production of vitamins, of the B complex, vitamin K, short chain fatty acids, such as butyrate, propionate, acetate, Butyrate is the main source of energy for the colonocytes, the cells of the colon. And it also helps with the production of certain neurotransmitters, as I mentioned, and regulation of anxiety, depression, as we're now learning. And so it has a lot of functions that we totally ignored before. Now, probiotics are pretty much leaf bacteria that we consume with the hopes that it will increase the concentration of that particular bacteria in our gut and confer some health benefits.
Gotcha. Okay, so then you're right. And you kind of discussed it a little bit earlier, but I think maybe some, more detail is just how those actually are influence body composition. So we know we have the things going on with the mice. I guess how about maybe start with, I guess you kind of went into it, but the digestive health component of it. But I guess, how about this? Is there a difference between somebody with obesity and a normal individual with obesity as far as what the gut microbiota looks like? And so, and maybe some more detail on what the differences actually are between the two.
Yes, that is a pretty good question. And yes, there is a tremendous difference in people that have obesity versus people that have normal BMI. So one of the most important difference is the alpha diversity. So that's something I haven't explained yet, but alpha diversity is the variety of bacterial species in our gut. So the way how I like to explain this is, in any community, you like to have several different professions so that the community can coexist. And the same happens in our gut. You need bacteria that have different functions. They can produce vitamins, short-chain fatty acids, mucus, degrade mucus, blah, blah, blah. So you need all these different functions. And so the higher the variety of these bacteria, the higher the functionality your gut ecosystem is going to have. So a higher alpha diversity has been associated with better health, and lower alpha diversity has been associated with depression, with Crohn's disease, with anxiety, with cancer. You name it, pretty much any disease. Right now, there's some sort of evidence that it has been related with lower alpha diversity or some sort of dysbiosis. Now, in addition to having lower alpha diversity, there are other differences. So usually people that have obesity tend to have also higher lipopolysaccharides concentration in their blood, which is a pro-inflammatory molecule. So lipopolysaccharides is this membrane molecule can translocate from the intestinal lumen into our circulation and can promote the activation of cytokines in our system, and that can in turn increase the permeability of the blood-brain barrier and therefore cause a lot of brain-related disorders. But yeah, so people that have normal BMI tend to have higher of several bacterial species that we are now recognizing that have health benefits, such as, for example, you already know Lactobacillus bifidobacteria, but other new ones are Akkermansia mucinifila and Faecalibacterium prausnitzii, which these two have been associated with health outcomes, better health outcomes, and have been also increased in response to exercise. Also, Prevotella tends to be higher. Prevotella is usually higher in people that consume more like a vegetable-based diets, and in people that live in countries that are not westernized in their diet. So I will say that have a healthier diet.
Right.
So there are several changes that are very marked. We still haven't created a profile of what is a healthy gut microbiota and what is an unhealthy gut microbiota, but we can describe several characteristics.
Sure. So then I guess, or my question then would be almost what comes first, right? would be, or the individual that has kind of a normal, or let's say with just individual with obesity, is it the or is it the lack of alpha diversity or the limited alpha diversity that then results in, right, the obesity and then, you know, all the other different disease states of the individual? Or is the individual's, let's say, bad or poor habits that led them to obesity, right, resulting in that alpha diversity? Does that make sense?
We don't know.
Yeah. I was going to say that's
we don't know
I don't know how you figure it out. Right.
I would say probably more than likely is bidirectional. So more than likely, you know, because when you do the fecal transplant to mice, these mice tend to have, you know, low alpha diversity and they develop obesity. So I'll say, well, maybe the gut microbiota created the obesity. Right. But what you're saying is totally correct. You know, if you have a very poor diet, you consume low variety in your diet, low amount of fiber, that is also going to cause low alpha diversity. So it's just, I will say it is bidirectional.
Yeah, that's kind of what I would think myself. And like you said, we don't really have a true understanding yet. You know, we saw there's quite a bit of research left to do. But yeah, it would make sense to me that you would have a poor diet and that resulting in both obesity and limited alpha diversity. But then you also see like what you saw with the mice, right? That you have the low alpha diversity, then all of a sudden the mouse starts to, right, become obese or gain weight. And so, yeah, it's, I guess, it's almost how do you win, other than to make sure that you're getting that alpha diversity, which is kind of another thing is how, other than just kind of the broad improving your diet, what are the ways that you would try to improve that microbiota? And are probiotics related to that? Or like, let's say probiotic supplementation or just fermented foods related to that? And then what are some other strategies to improve it?
Well, good news for everyone, probably everyone listening to this podcast, is that exercise is one of the best ways to increase alpha diversity. So that's something in our favor, another reason to work out, and having high variety in your diet. So not just eating healthy. If you're always eating the same stuff, that is also going to affect the alpha diversity. So you need to have a high variety in your diet. And so whenever you do meal prep, just try to take that into account so that you can create several meal preps, not just one. And also, you know, to make sure of consuming different types of fibers, not just one type. So not just, you know, supplementing with Metamucil and then you forget about that, fruits and vegetables. No, it's not like that. I mean, you need to consume different types of fibers. You also want to keep the consumption of, you can consume prebiotics, and prebiotics is, you know, by consuming, for example, onions and garlic, bananas, tomatoes, green beans, you know, a lot of vegetables have prebiotic fibers. So fructose oligosaccharides, inulin, yogurt, certain yogurts will have galacto-oligosaccharides. So all of those are considered as prebiotic. If you like wine, wine has polyphenols, and polyphenols are also pretty good for the gut microbiota. I wouldn't say the same about beer, but because animal research actually shows that it affects the gut microbiota, but it seems in humans that if you're consuming wine, it actually helps. So those are some of the things. If you can consume fermented food, great. I would not recommend the consumption of probiotics for somebody who is healthy. And the reason why I say that is because if you already have a healthy BMI, a healthy gut microbiota, why in the world would you want to change that? Especially when we don't know what it's like to have a healthy gut microbiota. Like, just continue doing whatever you are doing that is working, and just keep doing the same. Don't change anything. If you have some sort of condition for which, you know, consumption of a probiotic hasn't already proved on repetitive scientific studies to work, such as, for example, in diarrhea, traveler's diarrhea, cancer treatment-induced diarrhea, C. difficile infection, upper respiratory tract infection, ulcerative colitis, certain constipation also, although the evidence is not as strong for constipation. But yeah, so if you have any of these, for example, the evidence is quite strong. So antibiotic-induced diarrhea, if you take an antibiotic, well, that's actually another systematic review that I'm trying to work on and that I'm working currently, trying to answer the question on whether or not you should consume a probiotic simultaneously to taking an antibiotic, but not from the symptomatology perspective, but from the gut microbiota composition perspective. So we are still working on that systematic review. Hopefully we get it finished soon, but yeah, so those are some of the factors to consider.
Yeah, you probably are blowing or everybody's mind to say that you wouldn't recommend the probiotic. It's interesting. We have some unpublished data that we have just from a COVID survey, and some athletes, and just talking about different supplementation strategies, and topping the line was probiotics. Is very high up there, right? And so it's very prevalent for individuals to take probiotics because you kind of just hear that it's good for you, it's something that you should take, and maybe some misinformation about what's going on in the gut and how probiotics kind of influence that. But I would tend to agree with you that if you're healthy and we don't really know what a healthy microbiome looks like, why would you, like you say, want to try and switch that up?
I used to think differently initially. When I first started, I was like, no, take probiotics, they're good, right? And then I started reading the results of some studies. And even when I created my systematic review analyzing the gut microbiota after bariatric surgeries, I realized of the commonality of studies showing that higher lactobacillus or higher bifidobacteria concentration in people with obesity or in people after bariatric surgery. And in some of these studies, there was a positive correlation between lactobacillus, for example, and BMI. And so I was like, well, lactobacillus and bifidobacteria are the main species that we are consuming as probiotics. And then you see all these research showing that it has a positive relationship with BMI. Like, how is that possible? And so I started to develop a little bit of fear with regards to these probiotics. I do take probiotics whenever I have to take antibiotics. I try not to take antibiotics unless I really need them. But to prevent symptomatology, I take them at the same time, which is supposed to help with eradication of the bacteria, the pathogenic bacteria. But it's important to consider that, that we don't know really at this point what are the best probiotics. We have been recommending bifidobacteria and lactobacillus, but that doesn't mean they are the best ones. Maybe Akkermansia mucinifila in a couple of years will be even better than these ones, or Faecalibacterium prausnitzii, which I think probably in the future, if I had to bet, I would bet. I don't put my money on those.
And like I said, I mean, it's so interesting to kind of hear you say that, but it starts to make more sense. I mean, I take probiotics right now, right? Just because I thought the same thing, right? And so now that I'm kind of hearing this, I'm like, oh wow, I maybe should rethink this strategy that I have here. But I felt, or to that, just like every other consumer out there. But then you did say that individuals with a healthy BMI, that you wouldn't recommend that. Now, for individuals that are, let's say, don't have the healthy BMI, which may be related to or issues with kind of that alpha diversity, would you recommend the probiotic, or obviously you probably recommend shifts in diet, right? First, but would you recommend probiotics for individuals in that BMI classification, or is there a specific BMI classification you would recommend it for, let's say, overweight, obese, or morbidly obese?
The data we have now is very conflicting.
Yeah.
So data in animals is a little bit more straightforward. Data in humans looks all over the place.
Yeah.
And there is data, but you are going to find like half the studies showing that it doesn't do anything, and another half the studies showing that it does something, but very little. And so I think that we cannot conclude anything yet, because the studies are using very small sample sizes, like a sample less than 10 per group.
Yeah.
And the problem is that, when you're analyzing the gut microbiota, like when you're doing 16S ribosomal RNA analysis, you need a sample larger than 20-25 per group. Otherwise, you won't have enough power to be able to detect any significant differences. And so that is just to start. I think that a lot of the studies on gut microbiota are underpowered. And another difference that I have seen, and a common mistake I have seen in the studies, is that they are not being strict in their inclusion criteria. And what I mean by that is that they're not controlling whether or not the people enrolling the study consume antibiotics, or if they control for antibiotics, they only do for 1 month prior to enrollment. And antibiotics can change the gut microbiome for up to 6 months after they are consumed. And like, for example, in the systematic review that I analyzed in bariatric surgery patients, only 25% of the studies analyzed for probiotics consumption prior to the, screen for probiotic consumption prior to enrollment. And only 50% analyzed their diet. Diet is the main factor controlling the gut microbiota. So if you ask me, I just don't think we can conclude anything yet with the poor to moderate quality evidence that we have with humans. I think we need to do a better job in science so that we can get to better conclusions. Maybe for a person that has obesity, it will be helpful. I don't know. The thing is that we have 300 to 500 species of bacteria in our gut. And, these probiotics have from 1 to 12 bacterial species. So yeah, it might increase your diversity, but only tiny bit, not a lot. And something else, and there's one study that I have in mind that I would like to tell a little bit more about, because I think it's very interesting. So these are from kids so basically it had 2 kids, right? Babies, basically. In one group, their moms had high BMI, and the other one, the moms have normal BMI. And so in the first 6 months of life, both groups, the kids receive antibiotics. And then they measure the BMI of the kids at 7 years of age. So for the kids whose mom had high BMI, consuming antibiotics help them to gain less weight. And for the kids whose mom had normal BMI, consuming antibiotics increase their weight. Okay, so basically it's like saying, if your mom has a normal BMI, you were born through, vaginal delivery, all of them. So you are basically getting the gut microbiota of your mom. You don't do anything to change it because you already have a good set. But if you have, a parent or your mom with an unhealthy gut microbiota, maybe consuming an antibiotic at the first 6 months of age could be a nice intervention to erase and reset that gut microbiota and get the kid to a healthier BMI later in life.
That's really fascinating. Man. So then, like you said, kind of resetting, and you had, or maybe I'm kind of thinking about it myself and trying to wrap my head around all of it, just because it's quite a bit of information. But then it almost seems to me, like you said, are taking these supplements and whatnot. Do they cause? I guess is there an issue with imbalance between the species? Right. Is that kind of what you see, right? Where you start to take the probiotic or supplements and then all of a sudden you see or weight gain depending on the individual, right? Is it because what you're adding in on top of what your natural gut microbiota is shifting that balance or a direction that's not, I guess, normal for you. And then you're having some downstream effects because of that.
It could be, at the end of the day, it's not really the bacteria, the one that affects us, but the functions that the bacteria have. So the metabolites that they produce, because that's the way how they communicate with us, through their metabolites and through the membrane molecules they have. And so, yeah, it could be that the antibiotic can help to change that balance of bacteria, like gram-negative, gram-positive, or change into a more bacteria that has less lipopolysaccharides in the membranes, or it could be. I mean, we're not we haven't really completely elucidated all the mechanisms of action. We were just, as you said, trying to wrap our ideas around the experimental studies like this one.
Yeah, I guess just I want to obviously respect your time, but it's so interesting. So then, like you had said about with just some of the issue or the methodological issues with why we can't really make any conclusions, right, about use of probiotics and improving the gut microbiome and then improvements in weight loss and obesity. Can you isolate the effect of the probiotic or the gut microbiome, maybe just more specifically the gut microbiome, by doing the fecal transplant from human to human, right? Because, as I was asking you, would you recommend either doing the probiotics for an individual at the higher BMI level or shifting the diet, right, for that improved gut microbiome or biome? Can you control for the effect of just changes in diet, right? Does that make sense?
Yes. And so in order to produce high quality research, you have to control as many variables as possible with gut microbiota research, particularly because it gets affected by everything. So if, one person is doing more physical activity or just decided to change their diet or eat something different or sleep differently, or they are taking proton pump inhibitors or metformin or whatever, any of these changes is going to affect the gut microbiota differently. So future studies, I think, should not only focus on having a standardized methodology to analyze the gut microbiota in lab, which is something that we experienced, that was the first problems we had, but not also in study design. Like we have to choose inclusion criteria that will create a population that is quite similar, in between the control group and the experimental group, and that will hopefully try to isolate all these external factors, including diet.
Right. Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking myself as you were talking about those differences. I was like, well, how do we know it wouldn't be because of the person changing their diet, and that's why they ended up having the weight loss? Is it actually because of the gut microbiome, or is it because they've exercised more? Right. There are all these different factors. How do you watch that? Of course, and as you know, human studies are hard to be able to control those things. I mean, everybody, if you've ever done a human trial, specifically with something like gut microbiome or just diet in general, oh my gosh, it is so difficult to be able to run. It takes a lot of hours and a lot of research power, personnel, and everything. I mean, I've said that probably a million times on this podcast. I'm like, why don't we know? Well, because it's really hard. Right.
It is very hard. For my master's degree thesis, actually working with Dr. Willoughby, we had to do 8 muscle biopsies per participant. And it took me a year to recruit 13 male participants to do my study. It was extremely invasive. And for my PhD thesis, it was just like 55 participants, but it was only, a fecal sample that we collected. But still, some people don't like to donate.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I was going to say, did you do a muscle biopsy?
Not me personally.
Yeah.
Thankfully, no. I have done it. I did it once. So I practiced in my friend Paul Huang, and he practiced on me. But, after I practiced and I learned how hurtful it was, I was like, oh my gosh, I felt so bad for my participants because I had already started my study. If I had done it before I had started, I honestly would have put just like 3-4 muscle biopsies.
Right.
But, I couldn't change at that point. I just had to continue. But at the moment, it was I believe the PhD students were doing the muscle biopsies, not master degree students. I was a master degree student at the time. But yeah, it was quite impactful. I have a couple of participants passing out.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I watched a video of it and decided that was not for me ever. But so, yeah, I was curious to know if you had ever gotten it done since you had done it, or since you had done the study on it. And don't blame you for not doing it, for sure. But so like I said, we could talk. I feel like I could talk to you for forever about things like this. It's such an interesting and, like I said earlier, mysterious topic. But you are a very busy woman. So I will let you, get out of here. And, thank you so much for, just kind of donating some time to talk to us today.
Oh, thank you so much for that invitation. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure.